A video that's been making the rounds is where Joe Rogan posted a talk on his show and his Instagram given by radio personality Paul Harvey way back in 1965. It's called If I Were the Devil. Now, some have called it a prophecy, and if you haven't heard it, you can see why it's called that. Especially, there's two things that stood out to me pretty starkly. So let's get into it.
Because it's so wild to watch him say it. It's not good, but it also gives us a chance to right the ship. It hasn't hit the rocks yet.
If I were the Prince of Darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree. Thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington.
You know, what's so interesting about this is that Joe Rogan himself, who's not exactly identifying himself as a Bible-believing Christian, finds this impactful as listening to it and leaning into it and broadcasting it out. And that's, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Now, obviously, it's not a prophecy in the truest sense. A prophecy is where God says something to a person and they go out and deliver it. But what Paul Harvey is able to do, and you'll hear this more and more because there's some details coming up that are pretty amazing, is that we need to remember that the Bible presents itself as a full worldview. It's talking about the structure of reality. And it's basically saying that if you violate the structure of reality, that reality is going to violate you right back. That's basically how it goes. In other words, your car, your manufacturer says, hey, you're going to need to change that oil every now and then. But if you just ignore that, at first it won't even seem like a big deal. But over time, it will lock up the entire engine. And that's what's kind of going on as you go forward. And even a Joe Rogan or different people who are just aware of what's happening in society can pick up on that.
And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills.
Wow. You know, he was saying, wow. I was saying, wow, because first of all, I was born when this thing was broadcast in 1965. So I've literally, over the course of my life, the reason I found this so interesting is because I have had a front row seat to watching these things kind of go from kind of low-lying things to very, very much a part of our culture. Like what he was saying about television. I remember when television was pretty, it was monitored pretty well and all that. You didn't have, a lot of foul language or nudity or any of that kind of thing. Now all of us are so used to that. It's pretty remarkable when you compare it to the 1965 world.
If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves.
Okay, I feel kind of bad because of the church thing, because I've been at a church where we've seen some splits and divisions. I've been a part of that, and that this kind of cuts to the heart. But you can see how the devil would want to do that, right?
Until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild.
Wow.
Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door.
Holy.
Now that's one where he says, wow, and I said, wow, the first time I heard that, because again, I've watched this over the course of my own life, and seeing that happen, we'd let emotion go wild. But I remember there being rumors that we were going to start having drug-sniffing dogs at the school that I went to in high school. It didn't happen until after I left high school, and then we obviously all know that the metal detector thing has been talked about more, and there are schools that have that. And back in 1965, and even when I was a kid, that was unheard of or unthought of. This did seem very prophetic, like, oh, that's you're exaggerating. That's not going to happen. But now that's an active conversation. Doesn't even sound that unusual to us.
Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money.
All right, that's the other one that I thought this is definitely very specifically prophetic because, again, in 1965, maybe that stuff was going on underneath the surface. It obviously was, but it wasn't known. It wasn't seen, and that didn't come along until 30 or more years later, where pastors and priests were known to abusing kids and all this kind of thing, and taking the Bible out of these different contexts. Even the church itself was something that was still on the horizon and wasn't as spread out. And so that one specifically really struck me. I don't know about you.
If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct.
There's another prophetic book, and I'm gonna let you know about another prophecy that happened 40 years before Paul Harvey did this here at the end. But there is another book called The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, where he talks about this. He wrote this in the early 40s, where he was looking at where things were going and how we're thinking, and it's going to start eliminating things like high moral standards or patriotism is one of those things that they can statistically watch drop. And it's absolutely critical. If you want to have a nation that's put together well and defended well and all that, you need that, and it's kind of leaking out, and there's lots of reasons for that. But C.S. Lewis spoke to that as well.
I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
I love watching Joe Rogan's response, because if you are paying attention to culture at all, you know these things are cycling through increasingly, and they're going against the structure of reality itself. And that's one of the things that we need to pay attention to. And remember that the Bible is a worldview. It's saying that this is how the world is structured, whether you like it or not, whether you even agree with it or not. It's that way, and we can go back and forth on that. But the reason that he was able to do this is because he knew that. Paul Harvey did, and another man by the name of G.K. Chesterton knew this kind of stuff as well. And all the way back in 1926, he wrote these words in the Illustrated London News, where he was talking about where things looked like we're going. He says, but this skepticism is throwing thousands into a condition of doubt, not about a cult or about obvious things. We shall soon be in a world in which man will be howled down for saying 2 + 2 = 4, in which furious party cries will be raised against anybody who says that cows have horns, in which people will persecute the heresy of calling a triangle a 3-sided figure, and hang a man for maddening a mob with the news that the grass is green. What is he saying? And we've seen this. I've watched this stuff on Twitter where people argue whether 2 + 2 = 4. And our subjectivism is becoming so much a part of how we think that reality itself is starting to be disputed. And again, these guys are able to do this because they have this biblical underpinning and this natural law kind of underpinning where they can say, this is where things are going and I can predict it. And so we need to kind of take this to heart. And in Joe Rogan's words, I like to believe there's still time to right the ship. If you want to get into more biblical kind of stuff and where we address the authority of the Bible, there's a great video that we've done where we respond to Sam Harris' thing that he supposedly destroyed the Bible in 5 minutes. I think he probably didn't, but check that out. Thanks for joining us.